Hello, my name is Lemuel Reber, and today I will be giving my final presentation for environmental and occupational health for the public School of Public Health here at UAMS. And as a disclaimer, this is a student presentation, and I will be using a hypothetical scenario for an educational purpose. The presenter is a student at UAMS, not a representative of the agency named in the following slides. The information contained herein does not necessarily reflect the views of said agency. So let's get into what this scenario looks like exactly. My name, like I said, is Lemuel Reber, and to give you some context about my educational background right now, I am a dual degree student here at UAMS, trying to get my master's in public health, also in the College of Medicine. And in this scenario, I am an environmental health specialist for the great state of Oklahoma and their Department of Health. This was the picture of what I assume this state looks like, and I am proud to serve in the capacity as an environmental health specialist. And in this scenario today, I am presenting at the grand rounds for a group of physicians for the state of Oklahoma. And at these grand rounds, we will be discussing the feasibility of using wastewater as drinking water and what the options are for making that process possible. There are a number of public health concerns and human health concerns when it comes to consuming the basic um, basic need of consuming water or H2O, and that need has many different factions to it. Men and women are going to be different in their approximate needs, but as it turns out, the 8 glasses a day notion may not be as accurate as once believed. But approximately 3.7 liters for men are needed, and 2.7 liters for women are needed every day, and about 20% of that is going to be coming from sources from food and nutrition that people are consuming. But water is going to be used on multiple levels in the human body for removal of waste and the production of ATP and the consumption of food. Temperature maintenance, water is also used. Specifically, one specific aspect is when we sweat as individuals, when that sweat is evaporated off the skin, it has a cooling effect. Water is also important for joint health. It is important for protecting sensitive tissue as well. And signs of dehydration from a health perspective will be thirst. A lot of people, unfortunately, think that when they get thirsty, that it's time to drink water, when in reality, that's actually a sign of dehydration. And individuals very likely should be consuming H2O on a more regular basis than just when they are dehydrated or when they're thirsty. And the color of urine should be some close to colorless or colorless when deciding if enough water has been consumed. Now, how much are we using every day? In the U.S., it's about a little over 320 billion gallons of water. The 3 primary sources of that water is irrigation, thermoelectric power, and public sources in terms of where the majority of it is being consumed. I thought this graph of the United States was very intriguing in showing where the primary sources of water are being consumed and being used. Southern California, as you can see, there's a lot of green dots indicating a lot of water use. and this is because of the larger populations, which is not surprising. But what was surprising is how much water is actually used in eastern Arkansas and southern Idaho for agriculture and irrigation and mining and livestock, those sorts of things. Another hot spot is southern Michigan, um, and which is going to be using a lot of water for industrial means, and the eastern seaboard, where a lot of water is used for thermoelectric power. The I thought another bit of interesting information was that the U.S., at the rate of just over 320 billion gallons of water per day, is if you were to take that amount of water over the course of a year and spread it out, it would cover the entire continental U.S. in 2 inches of water. So, wastewater, like the premise, the main concern about the feasibility of wastewater and using it um, as drinking water after processing. It turns out it is possible, but we need to figure out what wastewater is as a source to begin with. And wastewater is basically just used water sources. So anytime that you use the restroom or wash your hands or use a toilet, that is considered wastewater. But also considered wastewater that may not come to mind is the water that runs off of roads um, and areas that are picking up a lot of chemicals and substances that need to be filtered out. This is also considered wastewater. And this wastewater must be treated for healthy human consumption. So where is this water coming from? I guess more specifically, there are basically three main areas, and the main concern is or the main three areas where wastewater comes from is domestic, municipal, and industrial sources. So residential and household water, offices, restaurants, and businesses. A lot of water is being consumed and used for various purposes um, in industry, um, as well as just um, regular life and residential living. And the water is picking up a lot of different chemicals and substances that need to be removed. Things like inorganic um, elements, supplements like uh, nitrogen and phosphorus, and pathogens that are needed to be removed. Treatment plants process about 34 billion gallons daily here in the U.S. And it's the most common processing method is wastewater recycling. It is very, very vital for the U.S. as we do consume more than 320 billion gallons of water every day. Approximately 15,000 wastewater treatment plants are in operation as of 2017, and it is projected that 56 more million consumers will be added by 2032. So the basic process of wastewater treatment is basically threefold, depending on um, the system in place and in use. There might be some variances depending on how new or how much money a city or uh, uh, area or government or whoever owns the plant, depending on how much money they've actually spent on it. But the more basic processes of how they work, more or less, work in three stages. And before that's either part of the first stage or before that first stage begins, however you want to classify it, there's a general screening process to remove most of the solute particles, large particles, and large items that are coming into the facility. There's kind of a general filtering and screening process to kind of remove remove those items. At which time the first um, first stage of treatment is a sedimentation. It does involve a sedimentation process to kind of gather the sludge, and as that sludge is removed, it more or less incorporates about 50% of the contaminants in the water itself. And as it is moved on to the next phase, um, a processes of biofiltration, which is just using biological um, objects like sand or gravel to filter out some more contaminants out of the water. Aeration is a process of allowing the water to mix with microorganisms or bacteria, and then exposed to the air, allowing the bacteria to eat some of the contaminants, as well as a process of oxidation um, as well to um, these various means of um, cleaning and treatment are fundamental aspects of the secondary treatment stage. And the third, final treatment stage has a large aspect of trying to get rid of the nitrates and the phosphates out of the water before it is actually released. So the alternative option in terms of irrigation, which is, like we saw in a previous slide, one of the largest uses of water, at least here in the U.S., very likely around the rest of the world. There's an alternative option about using a kind of less traditional but more economically feasible means of recycling wastewater for irrigation. And this was a study performed with wastewater out of a city in Bangladesh that incorporated differing combinations of sand, wood, charcoal, rice husks, sawdust, brick chips, and gravel. And it did see some success in removing metals like iron and lead, copper, and others, and some of the filtering substances themselves actually were better at filtering out certain metals than others, but the process did kind of struggle in correcting and maintaining a proper pH level for growing red amaranth, which was the agricultural plant used in the study in Science Direct. But it did show some promise in being able to economically filter wastewater for irrigation purposes. So the drinking water treatment is involved in about 5 steps of coagulation and flocculation, which a oppositely charged coagulant is added to the water to bind to the particles, and flocculation is those particles and solute and coagulant all combined together. The sedimentation process brings it all to the bottom, and the water that is continued off of that tank outside of that sedimentation is then filtered through sand or a certain kind of carbon called activated carbon, and then a disinfection process of ozone, UV or chlorination occurs, and here in the U.S. it is primarily chlorination that is used. It is really important for public health reasons, for wildlife, and for domestic concerns to make sure that the water that is re-released back into the environment is free from pathogens to prevent diseases like cholera and tuberculosis and typhoid fever. And we see that drinking water can be obtained from wastewater through those processes that were described. So these are my references.